Shadow integration is all about, it starts with acknowledgement. You have to recognize that you have these shadows, and these shadows exist. And if you ignore them, they'll only grow more powerful. The only way to release them, or you can't release them, you integrate them in healthy ways, is to acknowledge them, is to recognize them and meditate on them. Don't dwell on them. There's a difference. Once you meditate on them and you learn to integrate them, you don't have to dwell on them anymore. You won't even want to, because you'll feel like that's a closed chapter in your life. And then you'll move on to the next one, because there's always more. But my point is that listening to music, that is a great way, because when you're listening to like a sad song or an angry, aggressive song and you're really vibing with it, you are associating yourself with that song. You are relating to that song. When someone hears that breakup song and they're sitting there listening to that song and they're crying, they're applying it to their own darkness, and they're acknowledging it and they're feeling it. They're bringing it to the forefront of their mind instead of keeping it trapped in the back, in the shadows. You said a great way is to also be in nature and just listen. Yes, that is a great way. The issue a lot of times with that, one of the reasons why a lot of people struggle with meditation, is because they think they're supposed to be clearing their mind of any negative thoughts, instead of realizing that if you want to integrate the shadow, and if you really want to succeed in meditation, you want to go out in nature and you want to allow these thoughts to come to you and flow through you. You don't want to hold on to them. You want to be able to let them go, but you don't want to push them away. You don't want to try to ignore them, and you don't want to think of them as bad. So that's always not, and anytime I've given tips on meditation, and it's in a lot of books and videos about meditation, is to let these, whether they're positive or they're negative, let these emotions and these thoughts come and accept them, and then just let them naturally go as they go. Don't try to repress them. That's really important. But sitting in nature is not like exclusively a form of shadow work, but it can be if you're going into it with that intention. Just like listening to music is not inherently shadow work, but when you're listening to those types of songs, it can be. I feel like listening to music is a strong way to integrate the shadow. Because I was gonna say, like, I've always wondered, why are people attracted to negative songs? Like, why do we love songs that make us sad? What is the evolutionary benefit to that? What is the psychological benefit to that? And I really believe that's what it is. It is us bringing those shadows to the forefront so that they're in the light and they're no longer in the shadow. And there's a deep sense of relief that you can get when you experience that. And I think we've all experienced that at some point. There's so many ways, and everyone has to find their own way. So there's other aspects of the shadow that Carl Jung talks about, and they seem to be prevalent universally across most societies. So born out of the shadow is what Jung called the anima and the animus. The anima are the feminine aspects of every man that he chooses not to acknowledge. The animus are the masculine aspects of females that they choose not to acknowledge. Because we all have what would be deemed as feminine tendencies and feminine thoughts, or we all have the potential for feminine tendencies and feminine thoughts, and every female has the potential for masculine tendencies and masculine thoughts. And generally in our society, we're taught that we're not supposed to encompass that, we're not supposed to embody that. So we usually push these things to the back. And for men, it can be their emotional approach, their empathetic approach towards things. Men feel like they have to be rigid and stern and hard and have to show less emotion. So a lot of times we push those things to the back. And similar to women, they feel like it's not feminine to be tough and to be brute and direct. Those are masculine aspects that females might feel may make them unattractive in ways, just like a man feels like acting feminine in ways might make him unattractive. What's important is to realize that there are healthy ways to integrate those things. And it's funny because what a lot of people don't realize is that a woman who's strongly in touch and who's learned to integrate her animus, or that aspect of her shadow self, those are the things that are most attractive to men, if you think about it, and vice versa. So a lot of people might disagree with this, but I feel like men, the masculine aspects of yourself, the rigid aspects of yourself, the powerful aspects of yourself, that's what makes women generally attracted to men. But on an individual basis, a girl doesn't fall in love with a man for how powerful he is. Usually what the girl appreciates most about that man, if he is a powerful, masculine, strong, forceful man, but what the girl will appreciate most is his softer aspects, when those moments when he does show emotion. That's what's going to draw the female and really lock her into that man, because subconsciously she's going to realize that he's integrating his shadow. And the point of integrating the shadow, and it's not like it makes you a perfect person. The point of integrating the shadow is to become whole. There is no perfection. That's fleeting and subjective. But you wanna become your whole self. As long as you're suppressing your shadow and not acknowledging it, you're only part of yourself. Men are attracted to the animus in the female when she learns to integrate it in a healthy way. And that is, like when a man sees a girl change a tire, like a lot of guys will say, oh yeah, there's something really sexy about that, like she, whatever, I don't know, or if like a girl goes hunting, like a man will love that about his lady. It's interesting to me once I really started thinking about that, and even thinking about couples that I know personally, and what are the little differences in there that separates her man from the rest of the men that she sees in him. And it's often ways that he has learned to integrate his feminine aspects, his anima. I feel like when a man suppresses his anima, the feminine aspects of his personality, and he never finds a way to integrate them in a healthy way, there will eventually be an outburst, and that might lead to some strange tendencies in males, and that may be where some of this weird trans homosexual stuff comes from. I'm not saying all of it is that, and there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes I'm sure it's just a natural, healthy, beautiful thing. But I do believe that there's times when men become confused because they've suppressed the feminine aspects of themselves for so long. Same, and vice versa. You said, I love being able to do things myself, but Taylor taught me everything. Yeah, no, I know. And there is something satisfying when a girl is able to change her own tire, and a certain sense of pride, and it makes her feel more whole, and it's healthy. Although, a man should never just watch a woman change a tire. A man should obviously always help. But, you understand what I'm saying. And so for me, one way that I found to integrate the anima, the feminine aspects of my shadow, that's what writing did for me, my poetry. I realized my poetry is always coming from an emotional perspective. And I've mentioned that before. It's not the male rigid side that's responsible for this artistic poetry. That is the feminine aspects of my psyche. And just like I can bring out other aspects of my shadow when I'm writing, I can bring out the aggression and the pain. I can also bring out the empathetic notions and my emotional intelligence in general. I can bring out that fluid side, that softer side, and that's where love songs come into play and things like that. So it's a healthy way of integrating the shadow, and the shadow is not, for every man, it's not just pure aggression. It's much broader than that. I think that's really, really important to recognize. One way to identify your shadows, Carl Jung says, is to look at other people and see what bothers you the most about other people. And oftentimes that's an aspect that to be so true about yourself, that you can understand and relate to, and the reality of those things, and that's why it bothers you so much. So like for me personally, one thing I realized about my shadow self, one of the reasons I realized it is because it's something that bothered me so much when I see it in other people. I'm a people pleaser, and I've talked about that before, and that can be to my own detriment. You know, I've always felt like, for whatever reasons in my upbringing, and I talked about that in the last session, I feel like a lot of it had to do with my family dynamics, watching different aspects of my family not get along and me trying to be like the mediator between them. I've always wanted to be a people pleaser. It makes me happy to see people happy. But I never realized that about myself. You know, I just think, oh, it's good to help people. It's good to make people happy. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. Until I realized that I can be doing that to my own detriment. You know, I can constantly be saying yes so much that I don't learn how to say no to people, because I wish I could say yes to everyone, and I wish I could help everyone, but I can't, and we all know the cup runneth over, and if the cup's not full, then there's no extra to spill out for anyone else. So, you know, I would find myself, to my own detriment, going out of my way to please people. Everybody has a shadow. You can't escape your shadow. There is no getting away from your shadow. Like I said, the only way you can escape your shadow is to not exist, or to be completely covered in darkness. And that's literally true and also figuratively true. You can't escape your shadow, your own personal shadow. You're always going to have shadows. So, and just like physically, it's not just one shadow. There are shadows from many different angles. So, but the important thing is to learn to integrate that shadow. It's to acknowledge that you have that shadow, that shadow is a fundamental aspect of reality, and how can you acknowledge it in healthy ways instead of ignoring it? That's what shadow work is all about. And so how do you differentiate your shadows? Well, you differentiate them by how they manifest themselves. Shadows, you can't see a shadow, but there will be signs. Shadows manifest themselves in ways, and a lot of times, like I said, one of those ways is to find out what annoys you the most about other people. In what situations do you get highly and maybe even unreasonably frustrated with others? A lot of times, those are the things that you have within you that you don't acknowledge. You said, does a shadow always have to be a negative thing? No. That was my entire prerequisite here. Shadow is not inherently negative. There are negative aspects and positive aspects to everything, literally. And that's why I made the point that our instinctual reactions to things, they exist in our shadows, our instincts, because we don't consciously acknowledge them. And that's where that fight or flight comes into play. You know, the example is when you corner an animal and they have to choose to fight. Or even if you corner a person and you startle them, you know, and they hit you by accident, they don't think about that. That's their shadow reacting. That is when aggression seems to come out instantaneously. Sometimes that's necessary. You know, especially growing up, like evolutionarily, humans, we had to have that. We needed that because there's circumstances where you don't have time to consciously think about whether or not this is the right choice. Your shadow has to take over, your instincts. Emotion and empathy, that's part of the anima in a man, generally. So those aren't bad things. But men with too much emotion, that's viewed in a negative way. So if they don't learn ways to express their emotions in healthy ways, then yes, it is a negative thing. The only reason that it's going to be pouring out in unhealthy ways is if they don't acknowledge it. That's my point earlier, is that plants need light to grow, but too much light will kill a plant. And